Chapter 12. I like her black hair that she does things with in coils and plaits, glossy like the heads of those Chinese kids you see around the Haymarket. I like the way it's cut in a fringe that holds a slippery band of light, and the green berets she wears, the halo hats, and the hats of green straw, wove like raffia, and with a jet hole in the center when they are on her head. The warm rush of color in her face, with its smooth rich softness of tinted oils, her shapely mouth, dark red with a glisten, her large soft eyes clean and virile with light. She came smiling happily up to him, and he said, "I've just been admiring you coming along there." "No," she cried. "Well, two minds with but a single track. I was eyeing you off too." She surveyed him, impishly critical. "Plenty strange women doing the same, I suppose." "You came just in time," Johnny grinned. "They were getting to be a nuisance." "Let me at 'em," Francie snarled. Laughing, she put her arm through his and checked her watch with the golden-handed clock on the King Street courts. Their tram came and took them up William Street and down Bayswater Road, and when they were passing the stadium, Johnny jabbed his thumb at it and said with a grin, "Who are you putting your money on?" "What, my whole shilling?" Francie said, popping her eyes. "Der champ, of course. Who else?" "But I'm not the champ yet." "You're my champ," Francie said in a whisper, winking at him. "How's the family?" "Fine. How's yours?" "Goodo. You made a big impression the other night. Dad reckons my taste is as good as his." "Well, having seen your mamma," she said, "I take that as a great compliment, and you can tell him so." "Yep. He was raving about you, and Mom said, 'Stop it, you silly old man, anyone would think you thought you were single again.' And he said if I was, there'd be only one potater for me, and that's her sitting right there, Liz Killoran, the sweetest thing that ever come out of Ireland. And Mom said after the snakes, no doubt." They laughed, and Francie's laugh trailed away as she looked at Johnny and said, "Gee, you do look nice today. I like you in open-neck shirts. You look so boyish." "Well, you'd hardly call me Grandpa if I wore a tie, would you?" he chuckled. And then he stared at the basket on her knees. "Say, don't tell me that's the eats." "Sure is, but we're not off for the weekend." "What's in it? Half a bullock?" "No, I've had that sent ahead." She grinned. "Don't worry, I'll bet there won't be much left in that basket when we get home tonight. I found that all my gentlemen friends on picnics eat like horses." "Gentlemen friends," grimaced Johnny with the sinisterness of a baby. "What foul confession is this, huh?" She laughed. "You silly sap." They passed through Vaucluse, and Johnny said that's the sort of house he'd like to live in. One of those mansions high up on the cliffs. What a view of the harbor those people must get. What a sea breeze. And Francie said, "Just give me anything in that line anywhere." He kept a lookout for the brief ragged glimpsy patches of the harbor and sighed. The tram rounded the bend, and they saw the great stretch of the harbor like crinkled blue glass to the left, and the sere hot land about them, and on the right the massive awful cliffs of the Gap. "You haven't been to Watson's Bay before, have you, Francie?" She shook her head. "All it's ever been to me is a place where people commit suicide." Francie pulled away from him, and he followed her to the safety fence, a haphazard barrier of netting along the lip of the precipice. They stood looking down, watching the sea foam in over the corroded tables of stone at the bottom. and pour into the channels and leap up, wild and white against the sides, pitted with holes and terraced with ledges. And the fishermen down there, with trousers rolled to their knees, were tiny figures like mannequins. And Johnny said, "You wouldn't think we were up so high, would you?" And Francie said, "Gee, wouldn't you just? I don't wonder people are killed when they fall down here." "That's where they jumped from," Johnny said, pointing to a peninsula, a cliff that dropped sheer and then bulged out towards its base. "When they clear that bump, they fall straight on the reefs. But they don't always clear it. They hit it and bounce like a ball, and are often dead before they strike the bottom. That's what I love about you, those little gruesome touches." He laughed. "How's your feet?" "Fine, thanks. How's yours?" "I mean, for walking, Mutt," he said. "How'd you like to stroll up there on top of those rocks and sit down for a while? It's a wonderful view." She was a little reluctant, but went. They got under the fence farther along, and he helped her on to the little ledges of orange-yellow sandstone, and they found footholds in the cavities. Then they stood on top of the platform of rock that sloped 20 yards down to the brink of the cliff. Francie dug her fingers into her shirt sleeve like a cat. "How's that?" he said, eyeing the expanse out to sea. "It's lovely, Johnny, but do you mind if we sit down? I don't trust myself standing. I'm liable to take fright and fall over or do something silly." They sat down, and she felt safer, and she just let her eyes linger over the vast span of water twinkling in the sun. She saw a plume of smoke on the horizon, and he found another a little later, and they saw a ship once far out, and they watched one, like a toy, steam parallel with them, and turn in towards the heads, leaving a scar on the surface like a walking stick. They were amused at the tiny specks moving about its decks. "Oh boy, that air," Francie said. "Funny, but it's giving me a little pain in the back of the nose. Just shows you what a stranger it is. Well, you fill your lungs with it and take it home, and it'll last you for a week. It's crazy. You don't know what fresh air's like till you come out to a place like this." He looked at her side face, and was happy she was happy. He sensed his glance, and turned and looked at him with a quizzical expression. "Yes, well," she said inquiringly. "Oh, nothing." Johnny shrugged. "You just smell like a Chinaman, that's all." "I do not." She made to thump him, but he caught her hand and laughed uproariously. He fell back laughing, and she hammered her fist on his chest, and he choked laughing, and sat up coughing, and coughed till his eyes streamed with tears. "What you mean I smell like a Chinaman?" she said, half amused. "Well, don't you?" he spluttered, tapping his nose. "Don't we all? I've never met anyone yet who didn't bite at that." And he went on laughing. She laughed too, and opened the basket, and cut his laugh short with the sandwich. He had to clamp his teeth suddenly together to hold the obstruction. The wind turned chill in the evening, and they got down out of it into a little alcove on the rocks. She came in under his coat, emphasizing the snuggle with a burrowing movement of her body. Johnny chuckled and put an arm around her shoulders. "You're a lot of fun, Francie," he said. "Am I?" she said softly, looking up at him. "You are too. I wouldn't mind having you around always." "It would be nice," Francie said. "I don't suppose you'd like to marry me." "I don't know. Why don't you ask me some time?" She teased him, her eyes twinkling for the benefit of his shirt button. He lifted her chin and stared seriousness into her face and kissed her and said, "Well, I'm asking you now, will you marry me?" "Oh, gee," Francie said, "will I? I'd marry you if you were the last man on earth." "Oh, you would you? Am I that bad?" "You're a darling," Francie said, sweetly serious, "and you don't know what you've just done to my bloodstream." "Oh, Johnny, I do love you, and I want to be your wife, and to have your children. I do so much. Thank you for thinking me good enough." "Good enough? Holy smokes, listen to her. I'm the lucky one, and don't you kid yourself, I'm not." He hugged her tightly and thought of her as his. They didn't talk much, just murmured stray thoughts. Then the evening was on them in a purple haze, with the smell of wood smoke somewhere, and they thought they had better be going. Francie caught her breath at the lights twinkling in serried banks like blossoms of gold on the northern hills. She saw a golden boat out to sea and pointed excitedly at its beauty. And Johnny said yes, but when she looked at him he wasn't looking at the boat, and she said, "Oh, Johnny, you're not taking any notice of me." "Not there, there." And he said, "Sorry, I must have been dreaming." But he didn't see the ship. He saw only a fuzzy gray curtain, and he was still and silent with the alarm in him, waiting for the recognizable picture to come clear again. She pulled his hand and said, "Come on, darling." But he didn't want to turn and stumble, and he said, "No, wait a minute, Francie." And he kept looking out to sea, and she laughed in her happiness, and the attitude of his delight at the ship, bright as a fire in the deep blue, darkling evening. And then he relaxed. He could really see it. She stood on her toes and pulled his head down and kissed him, and he pulled her vibrant body to him, and she said, "Let's go home and tell the family." And he said, "And have them call us a couple of Alex." But all right, and they goat-footed their way off the rocks and ran holding hands to the tram. Chapter 13. There was the soft rustle of rain that Sunday night, with the sad swish of the wind in it, and it gave them a sense of comfort to be out of it, and to feel warm and cozy while they listened to it. And Costello, with his broken glasses on his nose, sat back on the couch reading the Sunday papers, and his wife had papers spread out before her on the table, and Costello said, "God, every time I see these society pages I could throw up. Look at that bung-nosed boob with eyes to the camera, and this flat-headed piece showing off. Mr. and Miss Cuthbert Brown at the Mikado last night. Robin Shakespeare dining with his fiancée, Miss Bobby Stanley Street, and all the rest of the stuff. Toff's Parade, Circus of the Well-to-Do. What makes them think them people are interesting? Who wants to read about that?" "They do, dear," said Miss Costello. "Gah, imagine us there in the paper. How'd we be? Mr. and Miss Costello eating hamburgers at Dirty D's. Costello, the well-known navvy, with his wife in the front stalls at the local bug house." He burst into a laugh. "Eh? How'd we be?" They were laughing about something when footsteps came down the hall, and the door opened, and Dano came in, drunk and fierce, and shut the door and leaned against it, staring coldly at them. "You're home, are you?" Costello said, putting his paper on the table and squinting his eyes. "It's early for you. The night's young. No larrikins about tonight for cobbers?" "Oh, Peter, don't start on the boy." Miss Costello pushed her chair back and rose. "Get your coat off, and I'll get you some dry socks, Dano. Who sold that priest on to me?" Dano said, his eyes gleaming with rage, lancing them. His mother, shocked at his tone, sat back in her chair. Costello bristled. "You've got a bloody hide asking him to speak to me. Coming up to me in the street this afternoon and talking me out in front of me mates. Why don't you mind your own business?" Costello stood up. "Who the hell do you think you are? Don't come that talk in here, you deadbeat." "You shut your mouth," Dano said, "and leave me alone. You're always at me, and I'm not taking anything more from you, so shut up. Don't you tell me to shut up. I'm your father, and don't you tell me to shut up." Miss Costello grabbed her husband's arm and his shoulder and forced him to sit down, but his dander was up. He was white-faced and flash-eyed. "Rotten waster that hasn't done a day's work in his life coming in here. What have you done?" jeered Dano. "You that come out here with a fairy tale, bills to pay, and you swilling the pubs dry, taking the food out of our mouths. Show me the time you ever went hungry, you dirty bludger. And listen, shouted Costello, rising. I worked for the few miserable drinks I've had. I'm entitled to them. But what are you entitled to? Nothing. But you never went without, did you? I've brought money in here. Oh yes, you've brought money in all right. An odd quid or two when you felt like it. When your bloody horses came in, or the cards were right, or there was a drunk you could roll. You took it, I noticed, no matter where it come from. And that's my business. Dano's fury was rising. If I'm smart enough to get my money easy, that's a credit to me. The fancy boy with the pretty bow tie, sneered Costello. The shrewdy with the hat back. You're a credit, all right. It was you that told the priest to chat with me, wasn't it? Dano said, piercing his father with a savage look. No, Dano, it was me, his mother said, going towards him, appealing to him for peace. I've been so worried, and I thought if Father Duffy had a talk with you, he might be able to help you. That company you keep, and everything, you don't realize what harm they can bring you. Dano's lips quivered with rage. His face was a white blank of fury. He said, It's like your stinking hide, and slapped her hard across the face. Costello shrieked a blasphemy. He was round the table in one movement and fighting, and they stumbled over chairs, and Costello's lip burst open. He swung, and the swing carved air and brought him into cushion a blow with his belly. And he grunted, gulping, but brought over a chopping right, and Dano fell, but staggered up and fought on. And the woman was pleading with them and trying to separate them when Johnny Costello came in and hauled them roughly off each other. His eyes were blazing with surprise and horror, and he said, What's the big idea? What do you think you're doing, Dano? You mind your own bloody business, too, Dano told him. He slapped your mother's face, that's all, panted Costello. Johnny stared, unbelieving. Then he said, God, it's just as well for you I wasn't here. Do that again, and I'll mark you for life. I'll mark you for life. Tears of hate and fury blazed in Dano's eyes. Dano, said his mother, you're upset. Go into your room. Go on. That's a good boy. Give him a hand, Johnny. Get away from me, snarled Dano, and got to his feet. You're all against me, the lot of you, and you can go to hell. You can go to stinking hell. I'm getting out of this house, and I'm staying out. For good. And the next time that priest comes up to me, he won't find me a dooley. I'll smash his face in. He pulled the door back and went through and down the hall and slammed the front door. And, like a tableau, the group in the room moved at last out of its stunned silence. Miss Costello cried softly, and Johnny soothed her. Costello cursed his mongrel of a son and swore that he should have murdered him. He never wanted to see him again either, and good riddance to the rubbish. He'll get no good out of it. He'll be sorry. Johnny picked up one of the chairs and sat down. He was looking through gauze again. The bubbles were passing before his eyes, bursting in a mist that fogged the outlines of objects before him. But it lasted only a few seconds, and his alarm died in relief. You're working too hard, you're reading too much, and too late. And reading lying down in bed and not looking after your eyes. When Miss Costello went around to see Father Duffy, he said he did not bawl Dano out. He called him aside from his friends and asked him along to the presbytery. And Dano said he couldn't make it that afternoon, and the priest said, then when you can. I'd like to have a talk with you, and that was all. But he told Miss Costello he didn't think she ought to worry about her boy, but pray for him. And when she had gone, he thought, he no longer wants to fight the restraint of the church and his religion. It's in the way, and he finds it more convenient to throw it overboard, scathe and outlaw it, and curtain his conscience against it, so that he can act with a free hand for evil. How many are like that, and have been like that? even the saints.